In the previous lesson, we talked about running HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So oftentimes you might require also installing MySQL. So that's if you have a database running, PHP, as well as you might require a local server to run on your system. So if that's a requirement for your coding and your development, you can go ahead and download XAMPP. So this is probably one of the easiest ones to get up and running quickly. So you don't really need a lot of technical knowledge. You just go over to their website, apachefriends.org, and then just hit download. So if you're on Windows, Linux, or OS X, so pick the correct version and then just download it and install it. And once you do have that running, you're able to open up their control panel, and with pretty much little configuration, you can set that control panel to start and to run your applications on localhost. So what that means is that this application will run as a server locally on your machine, and this allows you to develop with these other coding languages that would normally require a server to respond back the code. So these are not interpreted by the browser. It's written by the back end, and the browser again only sees that front end code. It sees that CSS, HTML, and JavaScript. And the only thing with XAMPP that you should have to configure if you are running in a different directory, so by default, wherever you install it, that's where you can work with the files. But if you've got several projects on the go and you're going to have to switch between different folders, so the best way, easiest way to do that is just hit this config, go over to Apache HTTPD config, and that's going to open up in WordPress, and go down. It's probably line 243 or somewhere around there. So what you're looking for is this document root as well as directory. And this is going to be where your root directory is. So this is where localhost is going to point to. So this one you have to change to match wherever your website files are, wherever your root files. So we can see here when we had opened that up and we went to websites, web design, source, that's where my index file is going to be located. So all I have to do is just type that in there like this, and this one like this, save it, and now when I have to stop it and restart it, and now when I go to localhost, and just to look at the website over here, so this is what it's going to be displayed at by default on your within your browser. So again, it's skipping over all this meta information and source information, and just looking at this body content and whatever content it has to output there. So you can see here we've got a basic boilerplate that we're using for HTML5, and we've got our content, we've got our navigation, our footer, and our header. So when we actually go over to the web page now with localhost, so now we've got XAMPP running, and we've pointed it to the same directory where our index page is, and all we have to do is go over to localhost, and we can see that we're running the same that same location. And this is an index. By default, it's going to take your index page as your root. So if you don't have an index, it's not going to be able to find anything. It's going to come up with page not found, or depending again on your server configuration, it might look for default or index.php or whatever all the different roots, possible roots are. So usually there's an order of roots, so the server will take a look at and see the files and see if it's available, and if it is available, then it will just by default render that page. So that's what we've got here, and that's what we're going to be showing you throughout this lesson. And again, it's not 100% necessary if it's all you're doing is HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, but setting up a local host really does speed things up, as opposed to, especially if you're doing server-side code, as opposed to having to upload and download your code constantly from a server. This really does speed everything up and gives you the ability to run that same code, that same server machine locally. And then whatever changes you do make, so if I was to make a change like this, I can quickly go back over refresh the page, and I see that my change is visible. Also, the good thing about Dreamweaver is I do have this ability where I can do this split screen, and I can see a preview of the browser content here on the right hand side. So this is one of the good reasons that, especially when I'm doing HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, it's really easy to kind of see these split screens with Dreamweaver. I think some of the other editors might have that as well. I know that Microsoft one had that, where you're able to do that split screen and you're able to see the browser preview. But if you do have two monitors, you can always have the page open, the local host open on one, and use the other one for your coding. And then whenever you make changes to the code, you can just refresh it. There's also some online options. So if you are looking for something where you don't want to download the editor, but you want to be able to preview your code, you can go to websites like CodePen, and there's a whole bunch of them as well that you can edit code live. This is just an example of CodePen, and all you have to do is new pen. You can create an account as well. And then just go over here, copy your code, go back to the CodePen interface, and here you can add in your CSS. It's got a whole bunch of styling that's by default, and also really good that it gives you error messages. So yeah, so you don't normally need to put stuff that's not within the body, because again, this is just for visual purposes, and this is why it's telling you this error message, because you normally wouldn't put all of this stuff in. This is just when you're this is just more for visual sake. So, and also you're tying in that CSS. So if you were to tie in any kind of CSS coding here, you can do that here as well. And then you can see that right away it does update that, and that goes for the JavaScript as well. That we've got the JavaScript here, so if you were to type in any kind of JavaScript, you could type that in there as well. So if you did something like alert, this would show that alert once the page runs, and you see how easy and instant that is. So again, a lot of different solutions. So if you are working on a little piece of code and you want to just quickly have a preview of it, make some updates and changes, you can always use these online editors as well.